from Fiserv. I'm Senior Vice President. I head up our debit payment network, Start, Sell, and Money Pass at Fiserv. Obviously, we have a huge interest from a debit network perspective at Fiserv to be able to support payments in the cannabis industry. And last year, we did roll out a couple of solutions. We know that there's some obstacles, roadblocks. We know that as we partner up with other entities out in the market that we'll be able to solve for those roadblocks. But we're going to talk about some of them today, and I have a great group for my panel today, and I'd like them to go ahead and introduce themselves before we get started.
Hey everyone, I'm Jacob Miller, COO of Paylotic and Paylotic Financial. So we've got two sides of the business. One, we've been doing retail payments for dispensaries for 10 plus years now. And then we've also got Paylotic Financial, which is the fintech, where we've got our sponsor bank, and we're opening depository accounts for cannabis merchants, cannabis adjacent merchants, and excited to talk about cannabis payments stack with everyone today.
My name is Michael Johnson. I'm the CEO of Metric. Metric is the largest track and trace provider for cannabis in the country. We operate in 29 different jurisdictions and have been around for almost 15 years.
Ryan Himmel, I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at LeafLink. LeafLink is the largest wholesale marketplace in the country. We also have a financial institution through three sponsor banks, where we offer banking services, deposit, checking, and so forth. We've been in the market since 2016. I would say that we're really starting to invest in the intersection of wholesale, cannabis, as well as financial services and banking. I'm excited to talk more about banking, commerce, and payments, and how all those three vectors come together.
Hi, I'm Rob Zeigler, President and Co-founder of Flex Payment Solutions. We are a direct payment processor. Our technologies are basically card payments as well as ACH. Part of our ongoing year with the payments industry is we created kind of like a Venmo type concept we call the face, where it's facial recognition and uses ACH in the background. So that tech is definitely there, as well as our ACH technology is integrated with other systems as well for that money movement. So excited for
Excellent. Thank you guys for joining me today. So let's start off. I'd like all of you to answer this question. We know there's a lot of cash floating around the industry. Obviously, we're trying to solve for it from a debit payments perspective. There are obstacles, there are complexities in the industry. Would like all of your guys' feedback, insights on what are you hearing, what are you seeing in terms of complexities, maybe some of the obstacles, and even things that might be rumors that are not true about what we're experiencing in this industry from a payments perspective. So Jacob, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll kind of go in reverse order. I think the rumor that I'm hearing is that cash is like not being used anymore. People are trying to say, hey, we're moving away from cash and we're finally getting to be at a point in the industry where we don't need to deal with cash. And I think that is unfortunately just not the case. I think whether we want to face reality or not, that cash is unfortunately still king with a lot of these businesses. And the cash problem flows downhill. And so what starts with the retailers accepting cash from their consumers and then them looking around and saying, hey, wait a minute, rather than dealing with the actual problem of depositing this cash and dealing with the cash in transit, how about I just pay a vendor in cash? And can I convince my vendor to accept that cash payment? And so we talk about, payment stack, and I think the cash problem is something not only the retailers, but every part of the supply chain really needs to focus on. And it comes down to having a real invoicing strategy for that business. So when they say, hey, I want to pay you in cash, it's, no, we've got other ways for you to actually pay us. As far as just things I've heard about cash, the number that I've heard thrown around is anywhere between 6 and 8%, which just as a hard cost to actually deposit that cash. And so when you think about the problems of dealing with it, it's not just the logistics, there's a real cost to that as well.
Yeah, I think the biggest, I guess, myth to piggyback off of that I hear, certainly heard a lot about cash, but you'd be amazed at how many cultivations and dispensaries have literally rooms full of boxes of cash, like movie parks, which is remarkable. But the biggest thing that I think gets downplayed is whether or not people are actually paying each other from a B2B perspective. I cannot stress how much of a problem this is in terms of the viability of the overall cannabis ecosystem. If you're in a position to where your normal AR is in excess of 120 days, you can't run your business that way. And you end up in a situation if you are a small lab that's trying to process payment or trying to process lab results and lab testing, but you've got 9 months backlog of AR and you're taking discounts just to get paid anything. This is a major problem, and it is likely to be the most significant impediment to the development and the progress in the legal cannabis market, at least over the last few years. And I just don't really believe that that's discussed enough, certainly at people that will talk about, I'm getting stiffed here, I'd like to have better visibility, why can't we do this like alcohol, that kind of a thing. But it doesn't really make the same types of headlines as other elements in the cannabis ecosystem.
Yeah, I agree. Just to piggyback back on those 2 points, most people know that cash is a problem, and we've done a lot of research with our customer base. We have about 78% market share on the wholesale side, and about 30 to 50% of customers are paying with physical cash. So cash is still out there, it's still a problem. I think there is a misconception as it relates to the challenges for payments on the B2B side versus the B2C side. We can talk about some of the ways in which certain organizations have tried to solve the B2C side. That continues to be a problem. On the B2B side, there are a number of payment solutions for the market. We have several of them, whether it's a B2B payment solution, invoice financing product, or a payment on sell-through solution. So those do exist, and they're compliant, and there are ways for the retailer to get a brand. Now, sort of to Michael's point, there are certain operators in space that will choose not to pay, and then you get into this weird dynamic where I'm not going to pay you, so you don't pay me, but we'll exchange product. And so there are different products that we think will come to market, such as like a trade credit program, if you will. But the B2B payments issue is not nearly the same as B2C. I just want to make sure that that's well known across the industry. We have heard of you for most of the market, and we see companies starting to embrace payments. It is a behavioral change. They do like to pay with a check, which may take them 14 days to sort of manage, and there's costs associated with it. But we are starting to see a world where more and more operators are seeing the value of facilitating a payment on a platform, whether it's through their financial institution or through a platform like Leafland.
And Ryan, are you talking about when you're saying the B2B, is it just within the ecosystem of paying one another, or even like, hey, I've got to go to Staples to buy myself a new filing cabinet to support
Yeah, it's a good distinction. So there are solutions for both. So from a B2B perspective, on our platform, you can facilitate payments via ACH as well as other platforms. But for non-regulated transactions, such as debit card transactions, more and more sponsor banks, we work with sponsor banks, that will encourage operators to facilitate the purchase of office supplies or other team expenses. You can do that, and you're starting to see that become more of a normalization within the industry. Now, there are certain questions and concerns from an AML perspective, so the limits on debit cards may be lower. They may be like $2,500 versus what's normal in other industries, but you're starting to get access to these tools that help businesses be successful.
And so just a couple follow-up questions too. So are the individuals, is it just that they're not familiar with the fact that they could use debit because it's been ingrained in them? Or they afraid to?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of a stigma in the industry, but I also think a lot of financial institutions are not toe dipping into the space and trying to figure out how do I get my financial institution to start to embrace the debit card product that we know is not a plain touching transaction. It's starting to get the compliance organization comfortable with that type of process. More and more financial institutions are going down this path, which we think is great for the industry because it gives customers more optionality. We're still sort of in the early days of adoption of it.
Rob?
You guys took all the good stuff, so, I think that, I agree with you on that there is more to the B2B, and it's an educational issue, you know, card payments, especially for that B2B side, you know, what we're hearing from our end are the ERPs, you know, can this be integrated in and so forth. It's one of those things that you really gotta have the right staff, we'll call it, no pun intended there, just for all of the situations that the business runs into. I mean, we are very, looking at some of the things that I've come across, a very, you know, how does the consumer take the payment, but going back to that business side, it is critical to have the right financial reportings inside the business itself, regardless of what you're doing, right? But when it is coming down to the cash piece, if they are paying in cash in that B2B transaction, you know, there are other alternatives, and it's educating that merchant, that business on what their alternatives are, making sure that it does flow properly so they can have proper, you know, reporting.
Okay. So Rob, I'm gonna pose this next question for you too, because nothing's really changed in the regulatory landscape over the last 12 months. It would be great if we could just use a debit card everywhere, or a credit card like we do when we walk into any physical point of sale, but that doesn't exist today. In the current environment, is there some ideal solution that you can think of to say, look, I know we don't have, you know, universal acceptance out here in this industry, we use debit credit, but is there some other step for payments that could be offered to the industry?
So something that is catching some traction, we're all, you know, in the payments area here, is the real-time payments network, RTP, that now system. That is a very hot thing. We have that technology already, and we are seeing a paradigm shift towards that from a funding perspective. But just like anything, you gotta have that adoption rate for the banks. So having that right banking partner for that, from a send transaction for payables, definitely will help in that end. It is something to keep an eye on there. So we're seeing more of that bank-to-bank concept there. There is nothing that I know of, and we've talked to council about this, that prohibits it, you know. So having that in your staff is definitely something that I recommend from that standpoint, whether it be consumer or from a business side.
Yeah, and so I just have to comment on that too, because we find it interesting that there's hesitancy to use debit, and yet you can go and touch somebody's account through, you know, RTP and ACH. So we always step back and kind of scratch our heads on that one. Obviously, we're advocating for debit, since I head up the debit networks at Fiserv. But it's just kind of an interesting concept that, you know, financial institutions are okay with that, but not the debit. Does anybody else want to share their thoughts on ideal payment step?
So I don't think that there is an ideal payment stack for B2C. It just doesn't exist in the market today because the card networks have not supported it. What I think is really important for operators and any financial institutions that are going to support a solution is to offer multiple solutions and have redundancy. Redundancy is absolutely critical for this industry. This industry has been plagued with financial institutions that have gone out of business or shut down their cannabis program, and the same things happen from a payment processor perspective. And so my advocacy would be to ensure that there's redundancy. Going back to the cash problem, there are some innovative solutions, as crazy as it may sound, to try to automate the physical movement of cash. So more and more banks are offering and their armored card services smart safes, where a customer that's at a retail location can put their funds into a safe that's secure, and that money is counted and then deposited into the financial institution through what's called a provisional credit next day. So the customer's getting access to those funds, even though they're stored in a safe at a very, at their location. That will help reduce the time in terms of access to float and things of that nature. More and more of our customers that are using our banking solution, and even the other financial institutions that I've spoken to, are starting to adopt smart safes as a product because the cash issue is still there. And while we may have operators that are starting to offer wallet products and debit types of solutions or cash ATM solutions, you're still going to get customers that pay with cash, and you need to solve that. So there's a few different alternatives that customers can use.
Just want to double down on the redundancy component, because I think that cannot be stated strongly enough. I think for whatever reason, these business operators seem to think that there's only one way, and there is one way or the other. So whether it's some form of debit processing, ACH via pay by bank, like the redundancy piece of that is, I think, the most critical aspect, as well as those cash management options. I think the smart safes, we're starting to see more of those pop up, and I think those are really great options for the business owner that just needs a shorter cash cycle and needs that cash availability. From an ideal stack perspective, I think it's just the more options the better, and giving those customers a way to pay. So speaking to the point of businesses not paying their bills, if you don't have a true collection mechanism, it's going to be even harder for them to do that. And so being able to follow up with them, send them reminders, just like a regular business would, as soon as an invoice goes beyond what the agreed payable date was.
Do you have anything?
The redundancy thing, I think, is kind of the name of the game in the cannabis space. So I certainly echo that. This is a game of survival, I think, for a lot of folks, and so being agile is critical. When I think about, I think a little bit less about the B2C side, because while I certainly recognize the limitations associated with credit and debit, the real opportunities for us to make meaningful advancements within the space is on the B2B side. And so there's a number of different mechanisms that I think exist for operators to be able to leverage the tools that are available to get over what we refer to as the hard side of the network. So the easy side of the network is getting people to actually use banks to process their payments, but you have a lot of other elements that make it very difficult to be successful in getting bank accounts, getting loans, this sort of hidden cannabis tax as frequently referred to. When you look at getting comfort as a bank or as a processor, you do a lot in terms of enhanced KYC and AML, and there's a number of partners that are here that I think have done a really great job at that. I think Green Check, Shield, NCS have done some of it. So these are folks that are really helping to make that hard side a little easier to get on top of. But what we're truly missing is this consistency and network across the ecosystem that allows for people to be paid on time in terms that are generally accepted so that they can run their business in the most efficient way possible. Losing an extra 2 days just from a truck to shelf float perspective is the difference between making it in this industry for some and going out of business. And so standardization, pulling together the opportunities and aligning the pieces on that hard side of the network is really what we think a lot about and how we can support and work with those partners.
Yeah, I have to say, when we started digging into the industry 2-3 years ago and learning more about it, I was surprised at the amount of effort for all players, right? Financial institutions, how much vetting goes into it, how many tools that you need to have. I give you guys all kudos for sticking with it, because there is a lot of effort that has to go in, way above and beyond anything else, any other due diligence that you would do for any other small business merchant that you would go online. And I view these entities as SMBs, right? Small, medium businesses that we're trying to go out and solve before. But when we think about everything that has to happen and for financial institutions, and yes, payments is one piece, but are there any other technology solutions that kind of help service everything, any other integrations that we're seeing, or maybe products that you even offer? But what are you seeing in the industry, just even, with payments, yes, and any other sort of technologies that might be helping out financial institutions?
Yeah, I want to give credit to the compliance softwares that are out there, because I think they're really leading the charge in this Green Check Shield, the likes. And really what it comes down to is being able to reconcile, I'm sure on the metric side we'll be able to talk a lot about this, the sales data with the actual money that's flowing into the accounts. And so being able to, on an individual transaction level, be able to associate and really logically associate and not have it be a time-intensive, human capital-intensive effort to make the association between, hey, here's the deposit into the FI, here's the reconciled transaction or batch of transactions that account for that. And so just like even that simple layer of connectivity between what's being deposited in the banks and then what's on the front end of their POS and ultimately in the track and trace system for the state, I think that connectivity of that data, which is being done through software via integrations, is what really is going to have companies like Fiserv taking an honest look at this and saying, okay, these businesses want to do this compliantly. They're putting the data out there. They're making sure they're doing the reconciliations so that we can underwrite them and that they will pass an audit and they'll be healthy long-term businesses. And so I think that is just a super important initial step for all of the sales to be really tracked to the depository level. So.
And Michael, do you want to talk a little bit? I did hear a little bit about your solution, and I heard you have a lot of data points. Are there any insights that you can share with the financial institutions in the audience?
So yeah, Metric does have a lot of data. So the element of any successful industry really comes down to standardization in processes that are either explicitly defined or implicitly recognized. And in the cannabis space, Metric is very fortunate to play a meaningful role in trying to bring forth both that explicit and implicit side. We speak the same language when you're using Metric as a cultivator, regardless of how you run your operation. We're talking about how products flow, we're talking about and gathering data points associated with the movement of the products throughout the entire supply chain, or really what we refer to as more of a genealogy. And so I think we've done well over the last 14 years at establishing standards for that process flow. The areas where we're working closer with some of those technology partners that you referred to, and companies like LeafLink in particular, is about facilitating those standards towards and making it easier for the ecosystem to be able to work within similar standards and be able to build and grow on top of that. So when everybody can look, and all banks can look at what happens within Metric as the single source of truth, and you're able to take that system of record to be able to build your solutions on top of and leverage reliability through the payment processing infrastructure, through the movement of product like LeafLink does, and ultimately the settlement of those payments, because you have accepted something in Metric and you can verify its authenticity, not only in taking physical possession, but also in the testing from the lab and the associated COA. So we really try and think about ourselves as helping to facilitate and bring forward that standard, again, on the explicit side, because some of that's going to always be dictated by the regulator, but much more so on the implicit side about how these norms have progressed and emerged throughout the ecosystem, such that we can ultimately build a much stronger environment for the cannabis space.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. We're already making progress in terms of our ability to lower the cost for financial institutions to serve. The prices have come down, and I think a large part of that's due to the compliance technology that have come to market, as well as data. Data is really paramount in this industry. You have a whole ecosystem of seat-to-sale tracking systems, you have ERP data, you have marketplace data. More and more of the partners within the ecosystem are working together to create standardization, as Michael is suggesting, which will help financial institutions in streamlining their KYB, KYC processes for onboarding, but also for transaction monitoring. Those are two criticalities for financial institutions to serve industries and serve the industry and keep the costs low. So we're making some progress there. I think there's more work to be done on making sure that the data fidelity is high and we have all the standardization that we need. We're making quite a bit of progress. I think there's some elements that will come to market in the future regarding artificial intelligence that will help support faster development cycles, which we're keenly excited about.
Rob, do you have any insights?
They don't, they took everything.
Oh.
I don't want to bore anybody.
One more thing that I forgot I just wanted to add. I'm probably far at the bottom of the list as far as the RTP FedNow experts in this particular room, but just from some of my research and looking into it, excited about its use cases in this space, one of the things that my understanding is that it's beyond just a payment protocol. There's more to it than that, where there's actually a messaging protocol that's built into RTP FedNow, and so beyond what's on a Nacha file and us just having the instructions, we can actually embed more data in that transaction. And so that piece of it really excites me because there's the track and trace information, there's the POS information. And so now, beyond actually having to do the reconciliation, being able to pass the data in that new technology with the transaction is going to be really powerful. So I'm excited for that use case.
So I just have to say, FedNow, federal government, election.
Not yet, I'm excited about it.
No, we always laugh about it in our space, right? Because we're trying to get the government to approve all this stuff.
Especially here in DC.
That's right, we're the perfect place for it. But no, thank you guys for sharing. I'm going to start with Rob. Hot topic, and Ryan, you touched on it. AI, hot topic everywhere, every industry. Are you seeing anything out there? Are you hearing about anything, how AI might improve payments, improve things for the cannabis industry?
It's out there, we need to embrace it. So, yeah, it's not going anywhere, just not to rewrite your emails. Definitely can be utilized. So we actually are reviewing a few companies to help us with that from not only an underwriting perspective, but from a transaction monitoring. It's probably more of the FIs, right? So it's the anomalies that they can pick up, right? Especially within ACH. Not sure on the RTP FedNow system, but I'm sure it can be there. But there's things that financial institutions can do that with these types of cannabis merchants, especially on that payment side, right? So it might have something very normal, and then you see that spike, right? So we're utilizing that from transaction monitoring or monitoring to underwriting, but also from the customer service, like those little chatbots, but extremely important as we're all new still to AI, especially the adoption of it. Have guardrails. Having those guardrails, especially from that consumer side of the business. I've heard of a couple lawsuits within that. Definitely, I recommend to vet the company, but also seek legal counsel as well. Quick story that I was attending a tech conference in St. Louis, and there was a lawsuit where the chatbot negotiated with a car buyer for $1. It was taken to court, and they found and ruled in favor of the buyer. So guardrails definitely are something that if you are seeking into this AI thing, look into, especially if you're going to that financial institution side, know where you can and can't do it, and just ask a ton of questions.
It will certainly take time for everyone to get comfortable with AI, but I am very, very excited about AI. If you think about mechanisms that can help normalize our industry versus other industries, AI is going to be a very powerful tool to help improve development cycles, normalize data structures. So at LeafLink, we're super excited about it. Now, we haven't fully implemented AI. We're starting to implement it within our development team so that they can produce some of the engineering work a little bit faster than they have historically, and learn some new codes faster. So we're making some improvements there. I do think that there's a world from a financial service perspective where customers will start to get prompted in the application. We're exploring this with the non-financial experience as an example, where customers can ask questions about my cash balance. If I were to pay these specific transactions, what would my cash balance be? And how can I optimize my payment methods to try to drive more cash within my bank account? And so we're still at the early innings of AI, but it's starting to get implemented within the infrastructure of a lot of technology companies, including LeafLink. And so over the next 3 to 5 years, you'll see some great advancements, and this will help us normalizing our industry so that all the complexities that we deal with, and we have to put people in solving some of these manual requirements, will be solved in the future with AI. So we are very excited about it. We think it's going to be a weapon for us to thrive as an industry.
AI is, I guess we couldn't get through this conversation without talking about AI, right? Like my swear jar used to fill up really quick, but the AI jar is wild. So what I would say about AI is it is a tool. It is not a silver bullet. As we talk about redundancy, just remember we're in the hard side of the network. The hard side of the network is going to be won by hard work. It's going to take a long time. AI certainly will provide many opportunities, but let's not assume, and if people are trying to sell you something, I'm just gonna make this work in AI, let's be a little mindful. There's a story that I've read from, so it's not an original story, but it's kind of the world we're in from an AI perspective. And so Max Planck in Germany, when he won the Nobel Prize, he just started traveling around Germany and giving speeches. And so his chauffeur says to him, I've heard you give the same speech so many times that I feel like I could give the speech. Max Planck says, let's try it out. So the next one they go to, the chauffeur gets up, gives a speech word for word, exactly the same way Max Planck gave it. When he got to the end of the speech, a question came up. And he said, that's an unbelievable question, so easy, I'll let my chauffeur answer it for you. He points to Max Planck in the back with the chauffeur hat on. Now there's a difference between chauffeur level, there's chauffeur knowledge, and real knowledge. AI is chauffeur knowledge. And let's just be mindful and be careful with different things that we commit to and paths we go down, because every time we rely on something else and someone else to do something for us, that's a muscle that atrophies. And so just be careful with AI. I'm going to keep filling up the jar. Probably use it to buy a computer that runs AI and queries faster. But let's just be mindful of where it is. It's a great tool. Still got to do the work.
Yeah, great reminder.
I love that story and that example because it's couldn't be more true. AI could probably talk for the rest of this panel and in the afternoon about the interesting use cases. Say it helped me make some pretty slick images for a presentation I'm doing tomorrow. But in all seriousness, some of the use cases I think are transaction monitoring, which was mentioned. There's just such a large amount of data there and data processing to just help read between the lines there. Fraud and fraud prevention, fraud controls. Again, just a massive amount of data that if you had to have humans sift through it, you really wouldn't get much insight, whereas you can train models to really understand what some of that data means and make some insights. I think, couldn't be more right that we still have to do the work. We still have to train the model. We still have to put in, the heavy lifting to make sure those guardrails are in place and that, the wheels don't fall off the car as it's moving because there's a person that tries to, find a vulnerability in your chatbot, and then all of a sudden you've got a lawsuit on your hands. So I think those are just some of the use cases, but I think more so on this generally, I think it's up to every business person to really take a look at what their roles, responsibilities, day-to-day team management is, and take a hard look at what the opportunities are for AI. I couldn't agree more, it's not the silver bullet, but at the same time, it does a lot of things in a really unique way that's different, that is changing how we approach code development, for example, is a really good example. You know, our engineers and developers, where we might have to QA something previously and have a couple of people actually look at it, we could spin up 1 million virtual machines and have 1 million hypothetical users step through our application and figure out what the most common errors are going to have and encounter. And so I think AI is incredibly powerful. It's just about what you do with it and how you find the specific use cases that actually improve your business.
Thank you, guys. One more question before we go to the audience for questions. We're working with even our competitors, right? Some of them are out trying to explain to them. We get a lot of questions, by the way. How on earth did Fiserv allow you guys to support the cannabis industry and it's not federally legal? I mean, obviously, we're only interested in doing business in legal states, but we share a lot even with our competitors because we do think this is a space that could really value, use debit rails for payments. Let's get rid of some of the cash. I want to ask the panelists, just talking in general to all the players, right? Whether it's a financial institution, it's another network, it's an ISO. What would you say to them to make it easier for them to understand why it's okay to be in this business?
I think the metaphor came up that, well, as you were speaking, which I think is like a rising tide, raises all the ships. And I think that it really is an industry and team effort. I think in some meetings today and yesterday, I've heard that, one of the most important things we can do as an industry is have a cohesive message to the regulators, to really understand what we as an industry feel and believe. And that's not the individual's thought or belief. And so to the point of, you're going to have competition. It's natural. Every business, every industry, it's about how you work and potentially with those competitors for the overall benefit of the industry. I think we all share a similar mission, which is we're trying to help cannabis businesses. We're trying to bring this industry forward. We're trying to make it look and feel a little bit more like any other business that needs to just be able to transact, bank, get insurance, get lending in a normal way. And so from the competitive aspect of it, I look at it and say, it's really a team effort and an industry effort. And so the more diversity and divergence of opinions that you have from industry leaders, I think it's just going to cause more confusion. And so I think conferences like this are super important because you get to be with competitors that you may not necessarily spend time with all and really kind of understand what are their priorities. How do our priorities align with their priorities? Okay, how can we really move the industry forward by having a cohesive message that works with both of our goals? So
I would argue that there's a lot of money in it, and that's why people should get involved. This is the time. The green rush is sort of on the other side, I guess, of the mountain. It's a great time to get in. It's the time to help be a part of building these more foundational, as I mentioned earlier, implicit types of standards and norms. Being a part of that now is huge. It's a lot easier to keep a customer than it is to get a new customer. And so this is the time to go get those new customers because you'll be able to keep them as this business and industry continues to mature.
Right.
I would say that there's a lot of learnings, there's a lot of history for people to rely on, as well as in companies and playbooks to follow. 5 years ago, there wasn't as much data out there for financial institutions to rely on. This is the appropriate way to run my cannabis program, or this is the appropriate way to facilitate a payment. Now that information exists, and there's best practices within this room and other rooms and so forth, and so if we can educate the rest of the financial service industry and have a consistent message, to Jacob's point, that's gonna help attract larger financial institutions, other credit providers that are so critical to our customers. And so I think it's a great time for institutions that we're kind of considering it maybe toe dipping to actually take the plunge and come into the industry. Now there will be people that come in and they have some learnings and then they decide to leave for priorities or whatever reason. But there is a lot of opportunity right now, and there's data for people to rely on to reduce the risk. Every financial institution is worried about risk, and now is a great time to leverage that data to reduce the risk and enter the market.
Rob, any thoughts?
I really like this topic. It's okay to be in it because look around, right? So we're in DC right now, and what I would love to see is more of the regulators that can push that to make this what it needs to be at the federal level. I started my company from Operation Choke Point during the Obama administration for misunderstood industries. Back then, believe it or not, payroll companies were getting shut down because they were viewed as high risk. What's wrong with that, right? And it was just a misconception. And I think that's what's happening here in space. But every year that I come to this, there's just more and more people attending this because they see the need for it. And there's a want as well, right? So it's just getting the right people here and to educating them for it. It's not going to go away. We need to embrace it. The states are adopting it. I mean, it seems to be every year we see more and more of that, right? So, let's not have another Operation Choke Point. Let's invite, we're here, and let's invite them here and educate them for it. And that's what I would love to see going into the future because it's not going to go away.
Excellent, thank you.
And I just want to thank Fiserv for getting to this point, and I'm just so excited you guys are here, because to me that is a signal to the regulators, to the industry, to the community at large that this is not going away and it's being taken seriously, and the companies that lead this industry, payments more traditionally, are here, and that's just really exciting.
Thank you. Yeah, no, we, my team and I, we were like, this doesn't make sense to not participate in this. And so took us a while. We had a couple steps forward, a couple steps back, just even internally trying to convince everybody, but it's doable. And we're willing to share the information and the knowledge that we gained through this process. But we have a few minutes. I don't know if anybody in the audience has any questions for our panelists before we wrap it up. Yes. Oh, we have, here he comes. Part of my team right there.
Thanks for all the insight from the whole panel. My question is in regards to future-proofing the cannabis industry. How do you all feel about cryptocurrency and running payments through cryptocurrency rails? And the second part for Michael, what do you think about smart contracts and using blockchain technology to store data and make companies run more efficiently?
So I'm just going to put my little tidbit in that we also support funding of crypto wallets. So you can see the trend that we have with our network. But I'll let the panelists here answer.
I'm just a blockchain enthusiast generally, so just very pro as it relates to blockchain-related applications. Crypto in cannabis is a tricky one. I think you've got two highly regulated industries that on their own are difficult. You stack those two on top of each other, the regulatory microscope that is now on your business is real, and that has a cost to it. So I commend the entrepreneurs that are working in that space, and I'm excited to see what potential solutions come out, because we need solutions, just generally. That's a real need for the industry. From the technical aspects of like, how do I feel it being a workable solution, I come back to the same concept with any sort of blockchain related solution, which is there's got to be an on-ramp and there's got to be an off-ramp. And if that on-ramp and off-ramp is ACH, you always have that constraint around the use case. And so I think stable coins are really interesting, where we might get to a point where there's some ubiquity in the stable coin that any user is carrying around in some wallet they actually want to use as a means of transaction, then I think we're getting somewhere. But I think we're still a little ways away, but excited about the use cases.
So blockchain is something that we spent a lot of time on over the last handful of years. So something to keep in mind with the supply chain is not an actual supply chain. It is a genealogy. And so what that means is that the plant will be harvested generally with a number of other plants, and that will be packaged together. So a number of plants could produce 10 pounds. Generally, it would be somewhere around 20 plants. Then those plants could be shipped to somebody else. That package, which is now 10 discrete or 20 discrete plants, is now combined into one identifier. That identifier shipped to somebody else, and that identifier is now, those 10 pounds are combined with another box of 10 pounds and another box of 10 pounds. So now I have 30 pounds that are all mixed that came from a number of other plants before. And then I'm going to break that apart into tinier little pieces that I'm going to identify, and then later I'm going to recombine them. So when you start talking about those different machinations in the blockchain, it just becomes very unwieldy and very expensive to maintain. It doesn't make it less effective, it makes it very difficult to maintain.
Anyone else? I don't want to, I'll give you 30 seconds.
Yeah, I just don't think that there's demand today for crypto. We try to be as customer-centric as possible, and our customers have not given us feedback that they want to facilitate payments with crypto. When that time sort of changes, then we'll evaluate it. I agree with Jacob, you are compounding risk on top of risk in a highly regulated industry, so I don't think it's really solving the problem today. I think maybe in the future though.
Not a whole lot to add more, but I do agree the compounding is there. Just as important is that payment provider of that money movement for the crypto is important because there's a lot of regulation around that as well. So it's just a waterfall, and getting to that price point is extremely important for all of those, regardless if it's cannabis taking it or a merchant out there taking it. It is an option, but I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. But I do believe later we'll get there, but it's just getting that price point down some people.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to all the panelists. It was fantastic having you up here. Appreciate it.